Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss the latest developments from the legal action against the Tory Scroungers over their dodgy PPE contracts, which has now culminated in the High Court ordering the Health Secretary Matt Hancock to hand over all the messaging related to these Tory Scroungers on the so-called VIP lane, whereby millions of our taxes were given to these people. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news in politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So for those not following this issue too closely, very quick background. So when the pandemic hit our shores hard, because Boris Johnson didn't use the time he had to prepare. We're an island and we had advance notice, we did nothing. Actually, we're still doing nothing in terms of stopping people coming in. So we still have doesn't just mean variants we produce in our own country. Variants produced anywhere else soon find their way here. But anyway, we were plunged into an emergency that needed urgent action. Johnson was granted emergency powers by Parliament to circumvent the usual procedures in issuing contracts to PPE suppliers to kit our neglected NHS and care homes before tens of thousands of people died from the pandemic, because wouldn't that be awful? But this is not what he used those emergency powers for. Actual suppliers of PPE, including in the UK, were left fulfilling orders for other countries while the government decided to give out their PPE contracts instead to friends and donors. New companies were set up in order for Conservative supporters and even ministers to pretend that they were suppliers of PPE in order to receive vast sums of public money. And although the government had the right to issue contracts without the usual tender process as a result of these emergency powers, they were not permitted to keep the details secret. They are legally obliged to publish the details of all contracts within 30 days of issue. This was not occurring. The reason being that as soon as contracts were published, groups like the Good Law Project were all over it. Recently, they successfully took the government to court. The judge said that the Department for Health and Social Care had acted unlawfully in not publishing the contracts in time. Later that week, Boris Johnson stood up in Parliament and said that it had now been sorted out, the contracts had now been published in full and were available for anyone to see. But this was, and still is, not the case. The judgment even noted that there were about 100 contracts still not published from months before. Months. I remind you, they have to publish them within 30 days. So the government was still not complying with the law. Johnson was lying about it in Parliament. So the Good Law Project teamed up with Every Doctor UK and took the government to court again. Just as in the first case, the government tried to argue that it was none of their business. Just as in the first case, the court told them to sit down and stop whining. They have also insisted that the government hand over texts and WhatsApp messages relating to the VIP lane. Now, the VIP lane was the direct line to the top of the Department for Health and Social Care that those close to the Conservative Party were given in order to receive these lucrative contracts. Not only was this a mechanism for pumping vast sums of money into the hands of Tory Scroungers, unsuitable people when it comes to PPE, but it was shrouded in secrecy. But the truth will out. The latest beneficiaries of the scheme to be reported on is a company that is run by a Conservative councillor and was given £276 million. Another given to a David Mellor, a Tory donor, given £160 million. Another given to a company that has no registered employees and is, according to the Good Law Project, actually insolvent. And a company whose registration lists them as suppliers of sugar and chocolate. They were given £108 million for PPE. This is what the VIP lane was. It was giving taxpayers money, supposedly for PPE, but it was going to companies that had, in some cases, no employees. Some of it was companies that did trade, but not in medical supplies. Can't make chocolate, surgical gowns don't work. And companies that had only just been created to take advantage of this Tory gold rush. And the sums of money involved were not small. And I don't just mean they add up to large sums. £100 million at a time in many cases. The thing adds up to billions. Now, sometimes you would see a £100 million contract go into a company that only had assets worth a few tens of thousands. How does a company that doesn't even have enough assets to order themselves a van to deliver the PPE manage to supply £100 million of PPE? Well, they can't. Of course they can't. Dodgy doesn't even begin to describe it. This is a full-on raid on the country's finances. In many of the cases of the contracts given through the VIP lane, it's not even like we got the PPE late or at a premium, because that would be better than the reality. In so many of these cases, we either got inferior products that did not meet safety standards or were past their expiry dates. Or we actually got nothing at all, and yet the government still counted it. Because they'd ordered it, they still counted it on the PPE they say they supplied. There was a notable example last year, you may remember. The government were under pressure to say where our PPE was after spending all of this money, and we couldn't really see where it was. We were still having shortages in hospitals. None of this money seemed to be spent on PPE producers or suppliers, which was a bit of a head scratcher. So the government talked about a huge shipment of surgical gowns coming in from Turkey. It transpired later that senior officials advised ministers not to talk about this shipment until it had arrived and been checked. See, they knew these contracts were dodgy and were likely to result in a lot of embarrassing revelations. But the government didn't listen. Oh, we've got this stuff coming from Turkey, it's all coming now. They wanted their success story, and then were left with egging on their faces when the whole lot had to be sent back. Now, I don't remember exactly what was in these shipments, but whatever it was not suitable for use in surgery. But now the government is being rumbled bit by bit. It's not a quick process. Legal action against a powerful and corrupt government is never quick. But the government have been ordered by the High Court to provide records. See, the VIP lane, in practical terms, took the form of a WhatsApp group of about 200 people close to the Conservatives, by all accounts. I guess you just buzzed in a request for a load of money and Matt Hancock told his officials to sort you out. Earlier on in the case, and I talked about this in a previous video, we'd seen messages from senior officials. In one, they were complaining of being drowned in requests from these VIPs, Tory donors and friends. They were warnings to ministers that fast-tracking these dodgy contracts meant that they didn't have time to consider the serious providers, the ones who could actually provide PPE. And going back to the scandal over the refurbishment of the flat briefly, see, what that matters is it's less about the expensive wallpaper and the snobbery and trashing John Lewis, although ironically that's what's biting right now. What it represents is Boris Johnson wanting people to do things for him so that he will do something for them. It's corruption. And do you know what? It absolutely infuriates me when you hear these Tory snobs daring to call, say, unemployed people scroungers, people on benefits, or scroungers, when that is a term very accurately applied to them. Boris Johnson wanted to do his flat up. He can afford to pay to do his flat up. He even gets £30,000 of taxpayer money to do it. Not enough. He wanted someone else to pay for it. So he approached someone whom we do not yet know for certain, but he approached someone to cover the cost in return for future contracts paid for with our money. That is scrounging. I want to do my flat up. I can afford to do it, but I'd like you to pay for it instead. Do me a favour. That is scrounging. This VIP lane is comprised of a bunch of Tory donors, politicians and friends who were bombarding the government with requests for lucrative contracts. It even included Matt Hancock's barman. They were generally in no position to adequately fulfil these contracts. They just wanted the money. That is scrounging. And that is scrounging on the part of people who are wealthy, very wealthy. They don't need the money. Some of these people used the money they got to purchase expensive properties, not upgrading their own house even. They still kept that. They just bought a mansion somewhere else. Oh, it'd be nice to move around the country. Let's have a house in every county, just to add to their portfolio. That's what we should be calling these people. They're Tory scroungers. They should be referred to as such. The flat represents the thin end of the wedge, but it is part of the wedge. I wish the public's interest was calibrated according to the scale of the corruption. I do. I wish that this VIP lane was being plastered all over the media, but it isn't. So if we want to hammer the Tory scroungers on the billions of our money spent on their corruption, we have to shine a spotlight on the relatively small few tens of thousands of pounds worth of corruption. Oh, and speaking of sums of money, one thing to finish on. I saw a comparison Interesting comparison. See, Boris Johnson's flat refurbishment was apparently £200,000 in total. This was the same amount of money that builders saved by unlawfully using flammable cladding on Grenfell, the tower block that was engulfed in flames, killing dozens, for which nobody has yet been held accountable as the sleazy Tory government cover for their Tory scrounger mates again. Also topical because they've just voted down proposals intended to compensate flat owners who have this unlawful cladding in place through no fault of their own. These Tory scroungers look after only their own, and the sooner people realise that, the better. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. If you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.